We're holding a short sales and education, communication, and training. So you got a long plane ride home, so you can read all the text underneath it when you have a chance. So we can spend this. Okay, so for S corporations, the big challenge is, I don't know if anyone here works with their new accounts department. So within operations, we're pushing on those various different areas. There's the PMS department, the new accounts department, the margin department. And a lot of people that work in other areas of the firm are not as close to those areas as you are. And so the new accounts department, for example, and Dan had mentioned earlier, for years it was acceptable to use what's called an eyeball test. Basically it says corporation or Inc. in the title, and that was acceptable to be exempt. And that's going to go away. So your first dilemma is, well, how do you identify currently which accounts are your S corporation accounts? Some ways you may be able to identify it is as a result of the FINRA rule that came in 2003 that has to do with having a customer identification program, which may typically reside in your new accounts area. As part of that program, they have to provide to you what's called formation documents. So within those formation documents, you may not have all, but you may be able to identify a portion of your S corporations. On top of that, the bigger dilemma is if you don't have a W-9 form, for example, for a corporation, it's not an S corporation, then you have to treat them like an S corporation. So besides the fact that corporations usually have the largest trade blocks and the amount of the proceeds are much higher than a typical retail client, the 28% withholding could be an enormous amount of money. And remember that corporations aren't used to this, right? Because we don't typically report on corporations and we don't withhold on corporations. So doing this now, even though the effective date is 2012, you got to start doing this immediately if you haven't done so already. The IRS and the proposed regulations has stated that they're I don't know if thinking's the right word, but they would consider creating a new W-9 form that would allow the identification of S corporations. And right now there is a box for corporations. This isn't happening for S corporations. So that's part of the challenges that you need to do now immediately with the new accounts area if you haven't done so already. The next thing is, just when you think it's safe to go back into the water, the tax year is over, everything's fine, the wash sales work, the CBRS is working great, now I can relax. Well, there's one problem, is after the year, there's this phenomenon called income reallocations. What does that mean? Well, that means that adjustments are made by the issuers. That means during the year they said it's a dividend, but then they reallocate either all or a portion of that dividend to something else. Part of that something else could be a return of capital. And as mentioned previously, a return of capital reduces the basis in the security that's being held. So in 2011, typically return of capital events are on REITs, real estate investment trusts, and equities. It gets worse in 2012 when you have a lot more, mutual funds could have return of capital. And then going on to 2013, you have this new, yet something else, but in addition to the income reallocation, so there's something called OID, which is original issue discounts, called sort of a phantom income. And that's important because the OID amount adjusts the basis. You have to add the OID to your basis. So what does this all mean to you? So remember we talked about the project plan. Well, on my project plan, I'm already got the ball in motion for my cost basis provider to speak to my provider of this information. See, how's this information going to be communicated back and forth? So I know you send me this file to my 1099 system. I know there's this engine that calculates the cost basis, but how do you talk to each other? Oh, and I forgot the The third service provider, that's the service provider that actually sends out the 1099. So how do you get it to them? And so these are the questions as operations professionals that you have to ask yourself. Okay, back to withholding on short sales. This is quite a dilemma. Currently, the years, the backwards withholding occurs at the time of the short sale. You basically take the 28%, and within 3 days, you have to deposit the money unless it's over $100,000. You have to do it the following day with the total of all your other withholdings. This changes. This says that withholding should occur at the time the short sale is closed. First of all, that's a tremendous change to your system. And the question is, how do you do that? So you have to start speaking with your tax people. You know, you have to be creative. Like, maybe you could say, well, maybe I could take that short sale amount, and similar to what I do with the 30-day grace period when the account is open, I'll segregate the money, but allow that money to be used for margin purposes. So there's no margin implication relative to the fact that it can create a Reg T quote, for example. That's, you know, just thinking out of the box a little. It's good to think out of the box. Think what your tax people think of that thing. But the point is that the systems people, or the system that supports your withholding system, that's a huge change. In particular, for 2010, which is this year, going into 2011. Right now, every day, your system just keeps withholding on short sales. And if that short sale is not closed until 2011, that creates an enormous undertaking, both for you and for the technology people that have to support you. Okay, and you know, last but not least, you know, everyone basically had covered the thoughts of education, communication, and training. So as operations people, some of the things that you're responsible for example, are customer statements, the integrity of customer statements. I'm sure you have people within your organization that are responsible to sign off on the statements on a monthly basis before you allow them to go out the door. It's one of probably a few documents that's the only, that and one of a few other documents, is the only official document that comes from your organization to the client. It's not coming from the AE, it's not coming from an advisor, it's your books and records. And as operations professionals, you know that books and records regulations are governed by the SEC and FINRA